All right. Y'all are here today because we had Rosie's Cater and they did a great job, but also because I've got you captive, I get to talk to you for a little while. I am Todd Zelenka, Vice President of Preferred Computer Services, and we have developed a better way to complete compliance. I've got my partner, Jay Harmon, with us. Patrick Haxton, the owner and president of PCS, unfortunately sat next to someone last week that attested after 4 hours that she had been at a conference where 70 to 80% of the people tested positive for COVID. 3 days later, he's running fever. Today, he's getting tested, so he apologizes in advance that he's not able to be here. But he said, you've got the torch. I wasn't going to speak anyway, so just record it. I was like, fine. Most organizations today, regulatory compliance, you'd have to say it's a real PITA. I mean, if you're dealing with compliance, it's a PITA. The task of attaining and maintaining compliance to multiple frameworks like NIST, CMMC, DFARS, ISO, PCI, HIPAA, and more is a huge challenge for nearly every organization, and it's also very costly. If you're responsible for, oversee, or are part of a team that's tasked with making your organization compliant and or secure, this presentation is for you. We have come up with a revolutionary, comprehensive, fully customizable solution to compliance and security that works with your organization through the entire process, focusing on the goal of attaining and maintaining compliance, not just passing that first audit. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you about the nuts and bolts of what we do. I'm going to talk about all the challenges that you face that some of you may have thought of and you may not have thought of when it comes to compliance. If you're like me, your job, regardless of your title, requires multitasking. You're always doing multiple things, and sometimes at the end of the day, you wonder, how did I ever even get it all done? But you've always had a smile on your face because you enjoy your job. If not, there's plenty of other options. But about 1.5 years ago, a bomb was dropped, sending the masses into chaos, CMMC. And at that moment, or sometime soon after, you went from this to this. Seemed like we were immediately inundated with CMMC lectures, articles, meetings, events, all kinds of information, emails, etc. And then with COVID, the virtual meetings began, Zoom fatigue, and webinars. We were all there. This frenzy of activity may have initially started in the C-suite, but for most of us, it delegated down to the technical team to try to figure it all out. You and your team may have gotten together to formulate a plan, and that plan probably had a lot of unknowns, twists and turns, and looked a lot like this. You're there, way down there, and you're trying to get up here to level 3, 4, 5, trying to figure it out. The problem was it was compounded by the fact that everyone and their grandmother is offering solutions, suggestions, products, tools, and services that are all pieces of the puzzle. And since there's still some unknowns and unanswered questions, as we're still getting all the information in, we still don't know exactly what the complete picture is supposed to look like. However, I admit I was part of that fury of information that had a couple of those pieces and did some talks pre-COVID and talked about what we could offer and how our little piece of the puzzle might fit a need within your organization. But I started to see that there was something more needed. There's a need for a holistic solution, a holistic approach that would look at the picture instead of just the pieces. One positive effect of COVID is the brakes kind of got put on a little bit, tapped on CMMC, so it gave us a little bit more time to at least step back and consider what we're doing, and it allowed me to come up with a better way or road to compliance and beyond that takes compliance, IT, and security in a different and revolutionary way. So looking at it from a different standpoint. But I first had to address the main challenges of compliance as a whole. Obviously, every organization is unique. No one organization is exactly the same. There's no carbon copy of any companies out there. Everybody does something different. So how do you integrate that all in? How do you manage and look at, as part of your responsibilities, or if you're part of that team that's looking at CMMC compliance in particular, trying to figure out how you do things versus what they are expecting on the control, or what we believe the best practices are in the controls, and how do you implement that through your organization. But even if you made widgets, if two companies made widgets, guaranteed that even if the widget is exactly the same when it comes out, the way it became a widget is slightly different within each organization. So you've got to take that into consideration. And then the challenge of allotting time and resources to this effort. As I said, we've got other responsibilities than compliance as a whole. So making sure that you've able to allot the time needed and the resources needed to figure all this out can be challenging. And the people that I've talked to, that's one of their biggest challenges, is they've got a team, but who's going to do what and who's responsible for what. And then the fact that there's multiple compliances. It's not just CMMC. You know, CMMC is the first one that is now saying that at the certification, you have to have all your POAM completed, and you've got to prove that you are meeting all your controls and you're compliant. But in the same respect, there's other frameworks that we're supposed to be compliant to as well, whether we're self-attesting or whether they're audited in addition. The integration of solutions. This is one of those areas that I find particularly challenging, because I can't tell you how many product demonstrations I've sat through and heard about the biggest and the baddest and the best tool for this, that, and the other thing. And then you boil it all away, all the buzzwords, and you go, okay, it only takes care of 2 or 3 things. It's not what I thought it was. And then how do you integrate that with all the other solutions that you already have in place? And the fact that compliance is ongoing. It's not a set it and forget it kind of thing. You're not going to get your certification and never have to worry about CMMC again or any of the other compliances. And then the biggest challenge, what if you fail? What if you go through this whole process and you don't make it? They say, nope, you didn't have enough to be able to meet the compliance, the regulatory compliance. So what do? Do you quit? Do you give up? I've talked to companies that are saying they may even get out of the DoD business because they just don't see a way of being able to make compliance work for their organization. And that's a challenge that businesses shouldn't have to face. I understand it, but it's because of what all it takes, realistically, to be compliant. First off, it takes a team. Regardless of your organizational structure, regardless of the size, you've got to have a team. Now, the smaller the organization, the more hats one person may wear in this, but it takes an entire team if you're going to attain and maintain compliance. So whether you have the bandwidth or whether you have to outsource certain pieces or parts, you've got to have all of these roles represented if you're going to attain and maintain compliance long term. What would that cost? Well, an ISO, an ISSA, making sure you've got an auditor that's looking at everything, a cybersecurity analyst, and your IT team. If you had those full-time positions alone, you'd be looking at about $75,000 a month, realistically. Plus, you've got all the admin, evidence collection support that's going to be required, the assessment fees, 10 to 15 tool subscriptions, 24/7, 365 monitoring, and the list goes on and on and on. This is why companies are saying they may not even be able to continue looking at pursuing DoD contracts because of this cost. So, looking at compliance from that standpoint and all the team, you've got to allocate those resources and time involvement for all the different stages or phases of compliance. Each of these stages creates even more complexity, challenges, and costs for the organization. You got your assessment phase, the SSP and the POAM, which is where most everyone is right now. But then you've got remediation. You've got to fix and make all the changes and implement all the different things, put the tools in place. You've got the pre-audit. You know, you've got everything done, and then you've got to make sure, double check. And then an audit defense. Do you have someone in your corner? So that's from the compliance side, but then on the security side, what I call secure IT, you got managed services. Are you going to do these things internally? Are you going to outsource? What services, what tools are you going to use? How are you going to manage them? The monitoring and the continuous oversight, because as I said, it's not a set it and forget it kind of thing. It's an ongoing, and it's never going to stop. There's always going to be compliance that we're going to have to uphold ourselves to. And now with the executive order, it's probably going to filter into even more corporate America rather than just the DoD sector, as CMMC has been the big buzzword for now. I do think it was interesting to note that in the last information that came out, CMMC wasn't even mentioned as part of the solution of that package. So does that, that leaves a big question mark. Does that mean they're going to come up with a different structure that's now universal? Are they going to add to it? It's always changing. And then 3 years from now, in the case of CMMC, you've got recertification and doing it all over again. So are you running the race, doing the hamster wheel, getting to be certified, you hit the certification and you go, okay, I'm done? Or are you looking at it as, let's prepare for 3 years from now? Because certification is not the goal. It's only a milestone. And if certification is your goal, you're looking at it from, I would challenge you to look at it from a different lens. So let's break it down. The assessments. First off, there's a multitude of regulatory frameworks. CMMC is not the only one. With these, you've got like NIST and ISO have multiple frameworks within the framework that you've got to figure out, okay, which ones am I supposed to be compliant? I did a conversation last week with an organization, and the CEO was like, oh, well, we don't have any NIST requirements. And his tech team went, yes, we do. He says, oh, we do? He said 800-171. They were like, oh, okay. So it's not, having the multiple frameworks and the fact that there's multiple frameworks within them can be a challenge. FedRAMP and HITRUST, because they're highly specialized, create even more challenges with verification, certification, and resources. Now, each one of these has an assessment, an evaluation, or an audit that's associated with it. And there are a number of resources out there that offer assessments as a service. I have been one. And most of these assessments typically are viewed as checkbox exercises, saying you either have what you need or you don't. And when you figure out what needs to be fixed, I'll come back and let's see if you've got what it takes. But in addition to the frameworks, you've got your technical assessments. This is where that multitude of tools comes in, where you've sat through demos, if you've been like me, trying to figure out what tools are best, what's going to work best together, to do a comprehensive network assessment, to do a data risk intelligence, to know where the data is, who has access to it. Is it CUI? Is it not CUI? Is it PII? Is it PCI? Is it alphabet soup? What is it? And where is it? And what do we need to do with it? You've got your security and vulnerability assessments. And all of these tools, who's going to run them? Who's going to manage them? What's the subscriptions? What tool are you going to use? Is the tool going to do what it needs to do? Dark web search and pen testing. But don't forget about the employee assessments, phishing campaigns. As employees are your weakest link, the human factor. And then surveys and any other assessments that are needed for your staff to figure out where they are. And this is one of my personal, because I have been and am a licensed insurance agent, but one of the most overlooked I repeat, one of the most overlooked things in an assessment is the cyber liability insurance policy. And the reason I say that is because every cyber liability insurance policy needs to be reviewed, and you need to know what is your incident and response checklist for that policy, because they may have some criteria that are not part of the regulatory frameworks that if you don't have, chances are that if there's an event and you have to check no, you don't have it, that your claim could be denied. And so it's a false sense of security. And I can't tell you how many businesses I've gone into and talked to them about their cyber liability insurance policy and the incident response checklist, and they call their agent or the company and ask for the incident response checklist, and it's like they're asking for some mysterious document. But I guarantee you, if there was an event, that document would appear immediately. So it is important to look at that. And then the physical security. You know, every framework has an element of physical security, and now, because of technology, physical security and cybersecurity are starting to get a little bit more closer together in gray. But your facility, the exterior access to, lighting, safety. For additional regulations like DHS, ISSA, and NISPOM, and then some of the requirements of the government contracts you may be working on or bidding for may have their own physical security requirements. All of that information to create your SSP, to be able to figure out all those pieces, how do they work together, and then when you take all the multiple frameworks into consideration, it just adds to more complexity to the situation, because what is the best practice? How do you implement, manage, monitor, and document and provide evidence of the compliance across all those different frameworks? What is it? How do they map across? And does one say to do it one way and the other say to do it another way? And how do you make it work? All to come up with your POAM. And of course, you know, CMMC says that when you go for your certification audit, assessment, whatever you want to call it, that you're to have all of that completed. You can't just say, hey, I've got a plan and we're going to get to it. Here's our roadmap. So we've talked about the assessments and we've talked about the POAM. Next, you've got all your remediation. You've got to actually do your POAM. You got to plan, manage, and complete it. You've got your tool software, the decisions to make, what are you using, the implementation of those, and any onboarding. Configuration and integration verification. I talked to a credit union out of Texas that was rapidly growing, talked to the CISO, and one of the complaints that he had was that he and his IT team had up to about 15 different tools. And I said, well, you know, just from what you're saying, the first step I would take is let's figure out what those tools are, what they do, and let's see if there's any that you don't need. He says, I don't need an assessment. I can tell you, I don't use any of them more than 50% of what they're designed to do. In fact, we found that there was a data migration gap, and the board decided that they wanted to purchase Digital Guardian to take care of that gap, add another tool to the layer, to the stack, not even considering that, number one, Digital Guardian is not cheap, and it does a whole lot more than just one thing. But they purchased it just to fill one hole instead of looking to see what are some of those other tools that they may already have that, if configured properly, they may not have needed it. Managed services. What are you going to do? What are you going to do internally? What are you going to need externally? And the onboarding. Monitoring, how are you going to do it? Every one of these tools that you implement are going to need someone that's taking a look at it periodically, looking for whatever it's throwing alerts, who's going to handle them, all those things. And then all the training of the tools, training of your people, security awareness training, physical security training, active shooter training, safety, emergency response training, and all of those things that go along with it. And then, of course, as part of remediation, there's always going to be projects and hardware. And One of our clients has got a network closet that obviously they had done before we became their provider, that it needs to be completely reworked and made secure. That's a project, but that's part of the remediation for them. And then if you've got everything done, you're ready for your audit. You're looking at the control efficacy analysis. Is the remediation complete? Have you verified and reviewed all the controls, and have the controls been met? Do you have documentation and evidence verification to prove not that you just have created the policy, but that you're actually implementing and doing the policy? Plus, as things will change, there's always regulatory changes and updates that are going to happen, and it never fails. You've worked long and hard, you're ready for your audit, for your certification, and all of a sudden a new bulletin comes out that you need to change something. Well, staying on top of that. You need a compliance management process and or a platform or both, as it says. And then, who's your advocate? CEOs, when I'm sitting there talking to them about it, they're like, well, the auditor comes in and they say, I don't like that. You need to do it this way, that way, what have you. But the auditor 3 years ago said it was fine. What's changed? Well, it's interpretation. Who in that situation is your advocate? Who's going to come to bat for you and say, whoa, Mr. Auditor. If it worked that time and it's still working and we have the evidence that we're doing it, so that becomes a challenge in and of itself. Your managed services. Who's going to house your SSP and the continuous oversight? How are you going to handle that? Do you need ongoing consultation, advisory, and management from an ISO? Do you need an ongoing verification or review from an auditor? Evidence collection and maintenance, how are you handling that? Physical security support for all those trainings, as well as any of the changes that may be required for, like we said, for contracts, etc. And then the third-party vendor supplier management. Even though you're not responsible for your third parties, vendors, you need to have a way to verify that they are trying to achieve or have achieved compliance, because you're going to be asked, what do you do? How you handle your IT, support for your entire organization, trouble ticketing system, help desk, remote and on-site support. How do you handle after-hours, holiday, and emergency support? What about mobile devices? And your overall network administration with monitoring, crucial services alerting, patch management, obviously, disk cleanups, restart of services. Do you have ticket generation and escalation that's separate for your IT from your cybersecurity? And are you looking at it from what is an event versus an incident? Because obviously you have to handle those two things completely different. But do you want an incident to be in the same ticketing system as everything else? Support for network devices, and of course the routine network maintenance. Vendor management, all the software and hardware, the ISP, your website company, unless you do it internally. Line of business vendor management, anyone that you connect that even if they're not part of your supply chain could need to be managed and asked what their compliance is as well at some point, especially with the executive order and yes, sir. Contract management? You're absolutely correct. Thank you. As well as phone system vendor. Because even though we all use our cell phones, most of us still have a phone sitting on our desk. And then the continuous monitoring and oversight. Are you using a SOC, a NOC? Are you going to create a SOC or a NOC? Detection, response, recovery, incident response, as we said, different than events. Tool management and monitoring, the compliance oversight. How are you looking at the oversight of the entire process ongoing? Setting up the quarterly live training, the monthly reporting, and the collection of all that evidence and documentation. Along with, as I said, the SOC, endpoint protection. Are you using EDR versus XDR, AV versus NextGen? What are you doing for content filtering and reporting, intrusion prevention? Your encryption of desktop, laptop, and files, as well as your backup encryption. Ongoing security scanning with real-time alerts, Of course, mobile device management. Remote connectivity, of course, that used to be a little easier. Now, post-COVID, that became a huge challenge for most of us. And in truth be told, a lot of organizations are still winging that part and hoping for the best. Dark web monitoring and scanning, and then breach and attack simulation. Communication and user security, email management, archiving, backup, security, and anti-spam services and encryption. Then you've got the host of security awareness trainings. There's a multitude of platforms out there, and they're all great, but there's limitations within them. What about password management, data loss prevention, and then email and phishing campaigns? Each one of these things have to be managed, monitored, implemented, and checked and verified and double-checked, which causes even more challenges. Backup and disaster recovery, your RTO and RPO targets, do you have those managed? Do you know what your limitations are? Do you know where you ideally want to be? Do you have a complete disaster recovery plan? What about a business continuity plan? Sitting in a meeting again last week, the CEO asked the 3 tech guys that were sitting there, he goes, do we have a business continuity plan? And they went, yes. He says, what is it? Can you show me where it is? And they were like, no. He says, because we don't have one. We've thought about them, but we've always been looking at it as, instead of proactive, reactive. Now we need to do this, let's figure it out. He says, that's part of what we're going to have to do. So he was already telling them that their work's not even near completed. Do you have backups performed automatically? Is it in multiple places for redundancy? Is it automatic? Is there verification, reporting, and encryption? What about a testing of the restoration? The time to find out that your backups aren't what you thought they were is not when something happens. It's before, so you can fix it before you have an event or an incident. And what about monitoring for backup failures? And then, so you've gone through all this, as if that wasn't enough, then you've got 3 years later, you got the recertification. So you're reviewing the regulatory changes and updates, looking for any additional required remediation that's completed, your control, review, and verification, evidence collection and documentation, and then again, who's going to be there as your advocate during that audit 3 years from now. So my question to you, is a complete compliance and security program even possible? That takes all of those phases into consideration. That is complete. Custom made, customized to your organization, and not a standard framework that's supposed to apply to everybody from the standpoint of, yes, there's a guideline, but how do you get that into your organization with the uniqueness within? That increases your overall efficiency, because it's got to be efficient or it's not, it's going to be a resource suck. It's going to cost more than it's worth. That's cost effective. That is a one-stop shop instead of having to deal with multiple resources, multiple pieces and parts of that puzzle. And that is guaranteed. Because the fact is, your organization will be attacked. You can't prevent everything. And there will always be regulatory compliance. That's just facts. And yes, when I say you can't prevent everything, when somebody asks me, oh, so you're going to protect me from everything? I'm like, I'm going to protect you, but I can't prevent everything. That's why you need the other steps of respond, recovery, because it's going to happen. You also need to factor the right combination of people, processes, and tools, identifying them, figuring out what is protecting, what is detecting, how is it going to respond, and then what is your plan for recovery. The good news is PCS has come up with a guaranteed complete compliance and secure IT program that is guaranteed and will provide peace of mind all the time. To know that we're there to support whatever it is that is needed within your organization, whether it's a full managed IT or just to be there to take care of the as-needed things, whether it's full cybersecurity solution or just a partial or a customized solution for your organizations, helping find the tools that we have gone through to decide what is needed, but to all as a result of not just compliance, but security and giving peace of mind. And if you'd like to learn more about our solution, feel free to contact me directly. I will ask, everyone has a little survey. If you don't mind filling the survey out, you don't have to put your name on it. It's not a permission for me to slam you and blow up your phone and email. But I do want to know what regulatory compliance frameworks are out there that you're concerned with or that you may have been tasked with. Because that helps us in making sure that we're mapping everything out for the organizations. We do have, I know, a door prize today, so be sure to make sure you've dropped in your business card for that. And I will be in the back. I'm giving you 20 minutes of your day back, which doesn't normally happen in these kind of meetings, but I will take some questions. Yes, ma'am. If it plays into it, of course, once we know exactly what all it does, then yes, it will play into this, because what we have created is a comprehensive, complete solution to where, regardless of where your organization is or the size of the organization, we can scale it. So if it's a 5-person team, DoD contractor, and but they need to be CMMC compliant, we can offer a complete solution. If it's a 500-person company that just needs some additional support, then we can customize it that way as well. And yes, the software is part of this, because that's all part of that was the biggest challenge that I had coming in to PCS, was making sure that we were selecting tools that worked together and integrated well and met the requirements, because there's so many out there that I spent probably the first 6 months just looking at tools, just mapping out, okay, this one does this, nope, can't use that one. And then working with Jay, is this going to actually do what we want it to do at the end? Is it going to provide the compliance and be the support? Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Okay. It is a strong word, and it was not chosen lightly, okay? I can guarantee that we will provide everything that you would need for your organization to be compliant. We can customize a program for your organization that will meet all of the regulatory compliances from any of the frameworks that you've told us that you want us, and that's part of that checklist to get ideas of what's needed, but making sure it's all mapped and done continuously, because it's not a one-time assessment. It's not here's what you need to do. We're going to be a partner through the entire process. So as things change, as things are needed, as things develop, we're going to be there and already be working towards a solution, so that at the certification, the first one, we're there. We're already there. You've already met what is required, and then you've got us to be able to defend during the audit. And if the auditor goes, nope, I don't like it, I don't like what you've done, then we'll fix it, because we're guaranteeing that you will be compliant. The only thing I can't guarantee, I can't do it for you. We can create all the policies and procedures, we can help you with those, we can help implement them, we can manage them and monitor them, but bottom line, we can't do it for the organization. So there is an element of responsibility in that. But all the support, I jokingly, when I was talking to Jay about the guarantee, it's kind of like a fitness or a weight loss. We're going to have everything that you need to be successful, but we physically can't do it for you. But we're going to hold your feet to the fire, and we'll do everything we need to do from our standpoint to provide all the tools and support that you need to be compliant. Did that answer your question? Okay.
So you say you're implementing the policies and tools, but you can't do it for the company. Are you talking about just best practices from cyber hiding from a human interaction with the machines and with the information? Or are you not implementing the policies in our environment?
Okay. We will help you create and implement those policies and procedures. We are there to support, we're there to provide guidance, and we're there to coach and provide everything that you would need. But the physical doing it, just like, we had a conversation earlier. You sent an email out and said, hey, I'm going to shut things down. Be prepared. I'm shutting them down. And the day it shut down, your phone was ringing off the hook. You can't do it for them, but you can be there to provide all the support and help them work through it. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for attending. Again, it's Todd Zelenka, and my card's out there. Love to be able to talk to each one of you. If you need me, I'll be right there at the back table.